My name's Elizabeth Michael. Thank y'all so much for joining us. Thank you to Abaca for hosting this. I'm going to kick it over to Eddie Armstrong, who's going to lead this conversation about social equity in the cannabis industry. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome to everyone out there and watching this webinar today. I want to welcome you all and kick right in and just start this conversation off by saying, as we know, social justice and systemic racism, as well as institutional barriers, are critical topics today. These issues have brought our country to the boiling point and our nationwide protests we're seeing all over the world. We have not seen this type of unrest in the world or our country. Just think about this, since the civil rights movement or the Vietnam War. These issues pervade cannabis now, and in the cannabis industry, this is going to be something that we will have to tackle, which is why we are here to explore topics today in the industry. Good morning or afternoon, Mary, our farthest traveler and panelist today. It's 6:30 a.m. in wonderful, beautiful Hawaii. But good afternoon to those depending on your time zones. My name is Eddie Armstrong, and I am the CEO and chairman of the Cannabis Capital Group. It is a pleasure to share this virtual stage with such distinguished thought leaders, and I'm honored to have been asked to lead today's conversation, so thank you. Dan and Abaca, your organization is outstanding, and I want to thank you once again for developing this forum. Our discussion today comes at a critical time in our industry, our country as well. Social equity has been in the public discussion for a while now, but its importance has been made more clear in light of the recent social upheaval and demonstrations for racial justice. It is a sad truth that minority communities suffer the most from systemically unfair and often racially motivated or outdated marijuana laws. To reverse an injustice so deeply embedded in our laws, our economy, and our communities, we need to take social justice and social equity very seriously and put it into practice. There's a lot of swift change that we've seen happen all over the country, from NASCAR to entertainment to sports. But what will we do before that to dive into the cannabis industry? So I want to start our discussion. We're going to go right into our introductions of our distinguished colleagues, and I'll go first, and then we'll turn it over to Mike, Mary, and then Dan. Again, my name is Eddie Armstrong. I'm Arkansas born and raised. I started a career in government affairs as a lobbyist for a small chicken company in Northwest Arkansas called Tyson Foods. I ran for the House of Representatives shortly after working as a lobbyist and catching the bug for politics. And during my time in office, cannabis legalization was coming into the arena. After leaving office, I took it upon myself and some ideas and thoughts from my wonderful wife to maybe start our own company that we now call the Cannabis Capital Group. And it's a fintech and advisory firm dedicated to democratizing the green rush. We are also dedicated to empowering entrepreneurs from traditionally underrepresented communities throughout the United States. The real exciting part about the Cannabis Capital Group is that we are currently building the first full-service equity crowdfunding platform for the cannabis industry, which I believe will expand opportunities for entrepreneurs, investors alike, in the public arena, and from profit to catch the wave of this cannabis boom. I'm going to turn it over now and ask for my distinguished colleagues to introduce themselves. Today, I know we have with us Mary Bailey, who is the Managing Director of the Last Prisoner Project, Mike Malcom, Consulting CEO and founder of WTF Media, and last but not least, we have Dan Roda, CEO of Abaca Cannabis Bank, who I would like to again thank for bringing us into this important discussions. If you all would like to each tell us a little bit about yourselves and your organizations, we will get started with you, Mary.
Hi guys, thank you again for inviting me to participate in this conversation. My name is Mary Bailey. I'm the Managing Director of Last Prisoner Project. Last Prisoner Project, we are dedicated to releasing cannabis prisoners and helping them to rebuild their lives. We've created multiple programs in order to do this important work. One of them is we are focused on working with governor's offices, starting with states that have already passed recreational legislation. Mainly, it's a kind of a no-brainer. Those states are already bringing in a lot of tax dollars coming from the cannabis industry. And so we're working with their governor's offices to create a new category of clemency specifically for nonviolent cannabis offenders. We've also created a reentry program for those participants as well. Before I started building this organization with our founders, I was really, in the cannabis industry, in and out for half my life, actually. I've been in the cannabis industry for 18 years. So I've seen it change a lot over those 18 years. And as dispensaries here in Hawaii started opening up several years ago, I decided that it was really important to focus on education and advocacy here in Hawaii. So I started hosting Maui Cannabis Conference. And part of that was really to educate Hawaiian locals about the cannabis industry, about the legalities, about marketing and branding, in order for our state residents to create their own businesses. Because if we don't do that, then entrepreneurs from other states will come here and take over. So it's really important to, really support our local commerce as well.
That's amazing. We can't wait to get to Maui when this pandemic is. Man's already promised that he's going to buy us all tickets out there. So looking forward to it. Mike, we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Michael Malcom. I am founder of WTF Media and WTF Consulting. And what I do is help advise cannabis companies and brands on everything from how to advertise their products and connect with their consumers. Also doing things as far as educating the public. And I've done a lot of things behind the scenes, working with government on advising government on same things related to cannabis, on just things of that nature. But that's pretty much what I'm gonna keep mine nice and short. That's pretty much what I've been doing.
Mike's a Chicagoan, so he's a neighbor.
Yeah, I would say I am from Chicago, and I'm also a social equity applicant here in Chicago, and I've applied for several licenses.
Very important. Dan?
Sure. So I'm Dan Roda. I'm co-founder and CEO of Abaca. We are a digital banking platform for the cannabis industry. So we connect cannabis businesses with bank accounts, lending, and payment processing. And these are difficult services to get for any cannabis business, but I think we can also acknowledge that the difficulty in obtaining financial services is just one more roadblock that makes it even more challenging, especially for social equity applicants, for example. And so, while I would say on one hand, probably the least qualified person to be on this panel talking about what we're here today to discuss, I'm really happy to be here because from Abaca's perspective, what we really want to do is learn how we can get involved and really be part of a positive direction here to really help give access to normalized, modernized financial services to the entire cannabis industry. And so that's what I'm here to talk about, and really looking forward to hearing from all of you guys. So on behalf of Abaca and the team, thank you all for being here, and thank you to everybody who's tuned in.
This is awesome. To all of our viewers, you're in for a treat. Dan, thank you so much for all that Abaca is doing and will do in this booming industry. Thanks to all of our panelists once again. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground today, guys, so I hope you've got your seatbelts on. We understand the hour. I'll do my best to keep things moving, making sure that each of you have an opportunity to share your insights, okay? For those of you who have tuned in to watch us, and if my CEO, who happens to be 4 years old, comes running in here, just disregard that he runs the real show. We'll be concluding today's session with a Q&A session, so feel free, audience participants, to come up with some questions. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, and all those tuned in out there today, we're going to dive right into this discussion. It's meaty. Our first topic today, systemic racism. This is an issue that has been thrown into the spotlight, as we all know, in the context of policing and the ills of racism that have existed for 400 years, if not longer. The count of things within systemic racism are too long for me to cover today. Problems of systemic racism have been with us since before the Revolutionary War, if you think about this, and will continue to be reflected in many of our laws that we see. Yet many influential people out there, such as my beloved dear Senator Tom Cotton, still openly questions whether or not systemic racism exists at all. As a proud Arkansan, Mr. Cotton's denial has been especially troubling to me. I believe that if we want to end systemic racism in this country, our leaders, both in government and in the private sector, and our neighbors must acknowledge the problem and confront it head on. And it starts within our industry here in cannabis as well. All right, panelists, here's our first question. How much does systemic racism and antiquated or outdated marijuana laws affect minorities' place in the cannabis industry? And I'd be curious to know what you guys think are some of the barriers to entry that you currently are seeing in your states or across our country. Who would like to take the first shot at this one?
I would definitely like to hit that one first. Just me, I've been working in the industry since 2018, fully trying to understand everything, what the cannabis industry actually is. You know, it's I think like Mary was saying before, it's definitely grown even in the two and a half years that I've been a part of it. And, you know, just yesterday, someone sent me a picture of all the faces of all the dispensary owners here in Illinois. And I knew, of course, they were all white, but seeing that visual really hit home. And I think it did because I posted it on my social media. And I think a lot of people responded to it just because I think everybody knows it. And I think that's when it comes to systemic racism. We know it exists, but it's not until you see a picture of it or a video of it, in the case of George Floyd, that you really kind of understand what systematic racism really means on a deeper level than just saying that it exists. Almost in the same way, I'm a realtor here in Chicago. Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the entire country. And I just had a conversation yesterday with a bunch of people in our office about the ways that us as realtors, we can actually affect change, right? We say things like, Chicago is the most segregated city in the United States, and we kind of we just go forward as if there's nothing that we can do about it. And I think that the cannabis industry in particular definitely has definitely has to take the responsibility to lead in these areas, and just like in real estate, has the opportunity to do so, because so much of what we do, whether in real estate or in cannabis, directly has something to do with race and the history of race in our country.
Mary, Dan?
Yeah, I'd love to speak on this. First of all, there's a really amazing ACLU report that was recently put out. I suggest everyone to check it out. It's called Tale of Two Countries, Racially Targeted Arrests in the Era of Marijuana Reform. It's got a lot of really important information that we should all be aware of. Last Prisoner Project, our work is inherently interconnected with racial justice. Not only is there disparity in who is targeted for cannabis arrests, but those disparities continue into sentencing, so that communities of color are more likely to be convicted and serve longer prison sentences for nonviolent cannabis offenses. We also know that suspected cannabis possession has been used to justify some of the worst examples of police violence and murder of Black Americans. It's a travesty, what's been going on. And not only, again, are people of color more likely to be arrested, it's 4 times as likely to be arrested. But then basically once you're in prison, and then even once you're released, recidivism rates in America are incredibly high. There's an 83% chance that individuals coming out of the prison system will go back into prison within 9 years. 83%, that's horrific. So that's definitely a huge issue that we're working on. And so that's kind of why we've created the reentry program with Last Prisoner Project's reentry program, basically creating pathways to employment for these people, and giving them a support system, mentorship along the way before they get hired and then after they get hired. So that's very, very important for our organization, creating a support system.
Well, I can't wait for Mike or myself to introduce you to Esther Payne at the Cabrini Green Legal Aid Fund if you guys haven't met. Work that Illinois is doing and the strides that they've taken for earmarks to improve and hopefully benefit minority-owned businesses. But the expungement opportunity was earth-shattering and really sweeping news. It was the first state to do this all through the legislative process. So there's a connection that hopefully will come out of today. Mike, I know that you know who I'm speaking of. Dan, I want to give you a chance to chime in here. I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're good. You know, I can't speak to the level of Mike's personal experience or you know, to the great work that Last Prisoner Project is doing. But you know, what I would say is that from where I sit, it is obvious that systemic racism is very real, and the first step is acknowledging that this is a real and still present problem, very much so. And then it's, you know, what can we individually and as a company begin to do about it? I will say I have seen some positive progress in the states where we operate in terms of incorporating social equity into licensing structures. And this is a complicated thing, but we've seen some good results in Arkansas where, you know, I saw the picture Mike made reference to on your social media and making the rounds on several others yesterday as well. And, you know, I am happy to report that if you made a similar mock-up of the owners of the dispensaries and cultivation facilities here in Arkansas, you would see some more diversity as a result of a social equity component of the licensing program that was put into effect here. And you saw that in effect last night at the beginning of this meeting. If anybody tuned in early, they would have heard Eddie and I chatting about a meeting that happened last night of the Arkansas Medical Marijuana Commission, in which an additional cultivation license was issued. And you know, the applicants appear to be a great group, all black. And you know, the meeting was live via Zoom, so you could see the second that the commission ruled in their favor. You know, they're in their little boxes here like we are, just jumping up and down, excited to get awarded their license. And you know, it was a pretty cool moment to see that was made possible, at least in part, by the fact that there was a social equity component to that licensure process. And so in Illinois, where the latest award of licenses has been delayed a little bit, and I think we'd like to talk about that a little bit later on today as well, I'm at least cautiously optimistic that, you know, we'll see some success in terms of more diversity and ownership of these businesses as the licenses are awarded. But then that's where I really think the role comes in for me personally and for Abaca, because great, these businesses have been awarded licenses. Now what, you know, they're already behind in a sense, and that the market has already started and is selling. And we've all seen the sales figures nationally and in Illinois specifically this year. They've been fantastic. So you're already getting in behind the eight ball a little bit. So what can we do? And again, I mean that both for me personally and my company, as well as for the industry generally. You know, what can we do to help is really where the conversation goes next.
I pitched this. There's a welcome mat waiting on you in Illinois. I think banks, especially those willing to serve the cannabis industry, could win customers for life when you think about the social equity program and whether or not it will work, by establishing themselves in the south side of Chicago and really gravitating to those customers. It's no secret that one of the major barriers here, and it wasn't for that family that was awarded last night, but financial resources, both in terms of existing wealth and savings and access to capital. If you think about issues of wealth, white households in the United States on average have 10 times more than wealth than black households and 8 times more wealth than Latinx households. That's an inherent disadvantage. And when talking about entering this new industry, it really stymies those that may not even be truly 100% African-American owned, like the one that was awarded last night in Arkansas. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, I pause. Breaking news. I've always wanted to do this like Don Lemon. Arkansas awarded, hear me out, the state of Arkansas awarded a license to a 100% owned African-American farming family that has been in existence for over 50 years. They've won numerous awards. They're partnered with the university. I got emotional, Dan, when I just heard you bring it up again, because without putting true emphasis on a social equity program, herein lies the state of 3 million people that are putting it in place and trying to get it right. So hats off to the great home state. We're going to move on to our next topic, but those barriers and highlights are very interesting. And from criminal justice and reform that we must and need to see, to financial services and opportunities to build up these communities, it's really important. Topic 2, social equity programs in the cannabis industry. Our second topic is about social equity programs in the cannabis industry. I feel that this has gotten a big boost here, as we were just talking about in Illinois. I've been very impressed with their adult use legalization. The state law specifically and explicitly favors social equity applicants for cultivation and dispensary licenses, and includes numbers for provisions to support broader social equity, including expungement, as I mentioned. But while the government reforms are essential to moving the needle, they aren't all the way sufficient. I was talking to a pioneer and leader out here in Illinois, Ron Holmes, about if this even works, and they said it's too early to call. The cannabis industry must also embrace equity and put it into practice, ladies and gentlemen. We each have a part to play in being able to bend the arc of history towards justice. And I believe with the nuances of not being in a place where we are bogged down by a lot of federal regulations yet, or state regulations, this is a chance for us to get it right on the front end. So panel, what do you think? Do social equity programs in the cannabis industry work? Who do you think is doing it right? States such as California, particularly Oakland, Michigan, Illinois now are a few states that have done this. Malcolm, I'm gonna ask you, or Mike, I'm sorry, not Malcolm, I'm saying your last.
People do that all the time.
Would you like to lead this one? I've had some conversations over the past 2 weeks with friends from Michigan that own and operate a female-ran cultivation facility. Capital resources are limited. The program is still yet to be seen if it's truly working and benefiting. And if it does indeed work, how will it be regulated? So what do you think about that? Do you think these are being done the right way? And if so, who's doing it right based off of what you've seen in the industry?
Yeah, so I've had this discussion numerous times. In my opinion, I think the idea is solid. The execution has been lacking in most areas. I thought Mary was going to quote this statistic earlier when she was saying numbers. I think I just saw something, I believe it was the ACLU or something. I'm seeing so many figures these days, but I believe something like only 4% of the cannabis companies in the country are Black owned. And I know that, again, so many of these, and I'm sure my numbers aren't that far, like it's not 4, maybe 5 or something, but it's a very small percent.
You have 2 of the United States largest cultivating companies that are publicly traded in Canada, and out of their 16 board members, these are huge companies, names don't need to be spoken, but out of 16 board members, only 3 are African American. Continue, Mike, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, and everything from ownership to leadership is lacking, you know. And again, here in Illinois, I know the companies here pretty well. I know some of the people in management at the different companies pretty well, and I see what that looks like. So again, I'm up for things, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, so to speak. But right now, I have the greatest hope for Illinois. Just because, like you said, we were the first state to actually do something through legislation. We didn't do it through a ballot initiative, right? They just said, hey, this is what's needed, and this is what's going to happen. The same thing, you mentioned the expungement. I thought that was fantastic that they just automatically made that. You don't have to do it. Now, I know if you have a larger, like a felony case, you have to go through more of a process before smaller amounts of cannabis is automatically expunged. Again, I know that we did some really great things in Illinois as far as for the dispensary round, not tying the real estate to the application. So you can apply without actually having to acquire the real estate to wait. Because even though they didn't do that for the cultivation round. And that's kind of like the thing. It's kind of like a hodgepodge. There were some great things that were done. Some things are still a little sketchy, and we still don't have the licenses yet, and no one knows where. So I have the greatest hope for Illinois for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, I'm up for it. But I'm still kind of like on the fence, because I've seen in other places like California where they had great intentions, but the reality of it is not maybe what they planned.
Dan, from a banking perspective, who's doing it right now? I mean, like I said, we get to wave a gracious flag in Arkansas for what is being done, but that's not by any executive order that we had to do it that way.
Yeah, I'm glad to be able to give a shout out to the home state there. And I'm excited to see, how things go in Illinois with the latest round. One thing that I'd like to highlight that I think is unique is actually what they've done in Oklahoma, where it's a completely uncapped market. So there are very low barriers to entry to begin with, which has resulted in what many would call a patient's paradise, a large number of producers, very low prices. Every little town in Oklahoma seems to have at least one dispensary these days, and they in fact have the highest patient count of any medical state in the country right now. 5% of Oklahomans have a medical marijuana card, which is pretty amazing. But what I think is especially noteworthy there has to do with most other states in their licensure requirement will have some sort of prohibition on licenses being held by those with a criminal history. And if we're acknowledging the reality where a black man is something like 7 times more likely to have a conviction for cannabis than a white man, even though the statistics say that we smoke about the same amount of cannabis with the same frequency, well, the fact that this criminal conviction is a barrier to entry in the same industry as so many states is problematic. Oklahoma has been, I think, pretty proactive about this in that they've reduced this barrier to entry. It is, in fact, I believe, if I'm quoting this correctly, well, there are prohibitions on license ownership by those with a criminal background if it is a non-violent offense, as long as it was more than 2 years ago. I believe you would still qualify to hold a license. And even if it was, in fact, a violent felony, for example, you would still perhaps qualify to hold a license after 5 years have passed from the date of conviction. And so, well, maybe there's still room to go there. I definitely think that's progress, and it's worth mentioning, especially in light of some of the work that Mary and her colleagues at Last Prisoner Project are doing, which really is, as you were saying earlier, is focused on, among other things, re-entry into the workforce. So I would maybe kick it to you to take it from there, but I think it's pretty interesting what Oklahoma is doing in that capacity.
Mary?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were talking about, who's doing it right, and I know California always comes up that there is a social equity program. I feel like there's a lot of work to do to make it better, for sure. But I kind of wanted to highlight some groups who have really been working really hard to make it better. One of them is the Indica, based in LA. Bonita Money, she has been doing this for a long time, and she's been really working really hard to build programs that really help people, providing education for social equity applicants. Also, another one from Oakland, the Hood Incubator. Those 2 women who run the Hood Incubator have been working really hard to really, again, provide education, plug people in. Actually, in both of those organizations have created programs, basically internships within the cannabis industry for equity applicants to really get hands-on experience, because that is so necessary. I mean, starting a company in the cannabis industry is so much work, and it takes experience, it takes mentorship again, and it takes finances, quite a bit of them. So it's I just really wanted to highlight the work of particularly those 2 organizations. I feel like they are really champions in that area in California, NorCal and SoCal. So wanted to mention that. Something that we've been discussing at Last Prisoner Project with the Indica and Bonita is the need for us to really work with, basically work with governors in order to update the way things are with parole and probation. If you get out of prison for a cannabis charge, there's a lot of barriers to entry of working in the legal cannabis industry. Even though it's now legal, if you have felonies on your records in certain, depends on the state, it's different in every state. But we want to provide jobs within the legal cannabis industry. That's where our deep reach is. And there's a lot of barriers to that. For working with plant touching companies, a lot of that is not allowed. So even though we have a lot of companies that we've created relationships with that will provide jobs, we can't legally do that for a lot of our participants and our constituents that we work with. So that's where it comes in, working with ancillary companies, companies who are in the industry but not plant touching. And there's a lot of those as well, thankfully. But in the big scheme of things, one of my personal goals with our reentry program is creating relationships outside of the cannabis industry as well. Tech industry, agriculture, I mean, the list goes on. Anybody that will treat our constituents with the respect that they deserve and provide jobs is just so very important, because basically all of the cannabis prisoners that we work with, we feel that they are not criminals, that they're victims of unjust laws. And that is just a really important piece to all of this. And basically, most of them are entrepreneurs. They were really just doing this work and their bravery before the correct laws have been put in place. So that's a little bit, but our next steps are definitely changing these laws where once they're out in this legal cannabis industry, those barriers are lowered and they're able to enter the industry, so we can continue with workforce development.
That's huge, Mary. The bag's too unlimited to pack on friends, family, relationships, things that I've seen in my lifetime, loved ones I've lost to unjust laws. But without focusing on all salt, let's put some sunshine, as you mentioned, on those that are doing it right, like those on the West Coast and those on the East Coast that I know of, such as ArcView Capital. They have recently committed in a big way to promoting social equity. And I'd encourage our watchers to check out the ArcView group. You can Google them and learn a little bit more. But as a major network of private investors, they currently have in the industry opportunities to steer investments towards entrepreneurs that are minorities and people of color. And you would want to check them out. I think Cresco Labs, it's still, the jury's out, but we will see. Chicago, they have, taken a step in the diversity direction with its new board member addition of Michelle Roberts. So that's somewhat encouraging, but it's, again, what do you do to make this really work? Channeling Ron Holmes, it's still too early to call the parameters in place. Mary, you spoke to very tangible things that can be done to track, assess, and change some of the things that we've done in our criminal justice system. Not to be more favorable, but if we're no longer talking about a future that has federally illegal statutes on the books as it relates to cannabis, and states have sovereign immunity to operate in their own jurisdictions, we should definitely be tracking, assessing, and changing or working towards change, no matter the party, no matter the special interest, working towards the change for the greater good of, as you said, people that were once entrepreneurs that just got maybe caught up on the bad end of, I mean, I get calls of people shaking their head. They can't believe how big and robust this industry is now, legally, considering, the colorful past that many of them have had. So we're going to move on into our next topic of discussion. That was really, really good information and feedback. Thank you all for your comments and suggestions. Mike, I'm not going to give you any shout outs on shaking your head. No, we've got to keep being Topic number 3. What is missing from social equity today? It's time to move into this final discussion topic. And before our Q&A, we have to talk about this existing problem just a little bit more, as well as some of the efforts to solve them. But few can doubt that much more still needs to be done in our industry and across the country. Consider Illinois, which is home, as I mentioned earlier today, to two publicly traded cannabis cultivators, 16 total board members, and not 3, only 2 of them are Black. Issues of exclusion, and tokenism are still pervasive and are challenging, ladies and gentlemen. It would be to the advantage of our entrepreneurs who lack access to financial resources and necessary partners to participate in this widely growing cannabis space to try their best to be agile and work their way through it. So panelists, how can the cannabis industry, how come our listeners out there that may be involved, I know we've got Rebecca Coletta in Michigan, potentially some folks out in Maryland that are doing really well in their respective spaces. So how can we in the cannabis industry, Dan, do better? And what policy or regulatory changes do you all think are necessary to make policy around social equity a reality for our industry? And what can we do better today? Dan, do you care to lead this off, especially regarding the role that financial services can play in all of this, because that is one of the steepest hurdles?
Sure. And, I think it's perhaps easy to pinpoint some areas where we could do better. It's going to be harder to figure out how we can actually do that. But I'll field the easier question you've put in front of me. One of the big areas we can do better is in access to financial services. And that does mean a bank account where you can simply deposit your cash and pay your vendors and write checks just like you were in any other normal conventional industry. But that also means, to a great degree, access to capital, because that is very, very much intertwined here. And so, those are just a couple of areas where I think the industry can do better. But they happen to be areas where I think we are positioned perhaps to help. So, I know that's where our attention and energy will be focused in really helping democratize access to financial services for the entire industry.
That's wonderful. Mary, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, the first thing that came off is how can we do better, and how can cannabis companies really show up and hire people that have a past, straight up. Again, people that have, say, felonies on their records from cannabis charges, they're not criminals, they're not bad people, they're victims of unjust laws, and they need jobs, and they're are quality humans. I mean, we've got constituents that have MBAs, and one of our constituents, Andrew Gold, he had one of the first licenses in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, his work in the traditional market, before he obtained that license, he ended up having to step away from that company, served 3 years. When he got out, he wanted to get his MBA from Boston University. Unfortunately, because of his record, he was not able to get any student loans, no student loans legally. Luckily, he was able to become a social equity applicant, so he got a scholarship. He recently graduated with his MBA just last month, actually. And so now we've been helping him obtain quality employment in the legal cannabis industry. And I'll be honest, it's been difficult finding companies that would be willing to give him a chance, because he's a leader and he deserves a leadership role. It's that's part of what we're doing is linking people up with the right positions. We've actually, Last Prisoner Project, we've created an amazing partnership with the company Vankst, the cannabis recruitment company. And so they will be providing mentorship, but as well as workforce placement. And so I feel that that's important. So the industry leaders, please hire people that have a past. That's a really important part of it. How else can we all do better is, as current medical states are moving to adult use, when that policy is created, Last Prisoner Project, we are creating a C4 arm of our nonprofit, which means that we can do legislative outreach and lobbying. We need a seat at the table, because there are some really amazing organizations out there helping to create policy, but none of them are directly focused on prisoners, people who are currently incarcerated for cannabis. And we need to advocate for them, because as states, new states come on and pass this adult use legislation, we need to let these people out of prison. to be honest, Last Prisoner Project, we shouldn't have to go back to states that are already recreational and really clean it up. In my opinion, that should have already have been done. So this is really important. And I mean, I work with people who are serving life sentences for cannabis. Fate Winslow is in Louisiana, and this is a state charge. He is serving a life sentence for 2 dime bags. He made $5 off that sale, and he got a life sentence. Michael Thompson, this is a current awareness campaign we're working on. Michael Thompson, he was an asset to his community. He got a NAACP Humanitarian Youth Award for his work with troubled youth. Michael Thompson has the keys to Flint, Michigan, but yet he's been in prison for 25 years for 3 pounds of cannabis. And my heart just goes out to him. He is, again, and he was an asset to his community doing the work. And so we are currently really striving to get him released as soon as possible. He's now 69 years old. He's got diabetes too. And COVID-19 is in the prison system. So we do not want to lose him. He's also created a 30-stop tour. When we get him out of there, he has created this amazing tour that I'm going to help him every step of the way. But going to city, working with troubled youth and hosting concerts. He was also a master concert promoter before he was incarcerated. His last concert in 1995 was a sold-out Aretha Franklin show. So again, you know, I feel like a part of what my job with Last Prisoner Project is sharing these stories. People in the industry need to be aware that this is still a huge problem. People are still being arrested, and we cannot forget about them. As this becomes a booming industry, we cannot forget these people that are still on the inside, basically rotting in there. It's not okay. We need to clean up the mess that we've been making over the last couple decades and really just help these people rebuild their lives, bring these families back together.
I feel your passion all the way from Maui, and it's deeply noted because this is a reality of our world. It doesn't always have to be that way. That is a cannabis related business, an ancillary service that that gentleman will be providing the day he comes home. That 30 city tour is not plant touching, but wow, the education that will be gained from criminal justice reform and a system that did that. One in which that opened it up and gave him the keys to the city first and said, we made you, you're one of ours, promote, we love, only until you lock them up and throw away the key. And he's watching companies come online that are doing magnificently well in Flint, Michigan now from inside a jail cell. We have work to do in it as an industry, investors, and please, and if you're out there, we encourage you to invest with minority-owned businesses and companies to begin to build up so that we can be empowered to build up our communities, to put a ladder outside of our boat when that gentleman comes home from prison and pull him back up into a boat and allow for him to go downstream and live out the best days of his life in the future. So I'll leave it for anyone else. Mike, you got any more to that? I know you probably, you know, that's heartfelt, Mary. I had to just say thank you for sharing that.
That was really great, Barry. Yeah, and I think we all have to do what we can to push these policies and this whole entire movement forward. So what I've been doing since I've been involved in the cannabis industry is educate. Educate whether it's the cannabis companies on the best ways to communicate what their point that they're trying to get across to their consumer base or their patients. Educate the customers on everything from the product to the processes to the business of cannabis, how everything comes together from seed to sale. And then also in the last year or so, I've done a lot with local government, both the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, to help them understand what this new industry really is and what sensitivities they need to have as well. And I'm happy to see, again, that everybody recognizes that Illinois has some of the most progressive laws when it comes to this industry. But again, it's early on, so we don't really know how that looks when the actual licenses come out. But I think it's so important for people to understand not just that there's money to be made, but the entire full context around cannabis in Illinois. And that was one of the things that discussions that I was having right before the whole COVID thing was happening. I have a friend of mine, a real estate client, who is actually on the board, the head of the police board here in Chicago. And I had a conversation with him in February, and I said, you know what I think would be really great? What if I came in and talked to police about cannabis? Like, I don't know if they even have had any training on cannabis, how to handle people. You know, at the time, dispensaries were just opening up, and there were these long lines down the street in residential neighborhoods. And the people in those neighborhoods don't know what to think about that. So I've just had many times over the last few months, I just did something with Chicago Realtor magazine, same type of questions. And it wasn't so much how do we make money as realtors, it's how should residents in these neighborhoods where these new businesses are opening up, how should they be viewed? You know, and what does it mean? I know I spoke to the city of Chicago one time, and this was in last summer. And at the time they were saying that they didn't want to have dispensaries downtown, and they wanted to only have them in the minority neighborhoods because they thought that that would help people in those neighborhoods get the jobs. But what they weren't thinking was that what that actually does is it takes away from people who actually want to own dispensaries and are from those neighborhoods. If you take that away and let the large MSOs come in, then people like myself who want to open up in our neighborhoods won't even have the opportunity because it's such a limited space. And again, I'm sure we're all seeing this right now over the last couple of weeks. So many things have good intentions, you know, but they end up hurting the people that they're intended to help in the long run. And so I think we have an opportunity right now, since this is such a brand new industry, to get ahead of those things. And I think it's incumbent upon everybody, whether you're in the industry or you just like cannabis, or even if you don't like cannabis, right, but you don't like hypocrisy, right, to speak up when you see something that just flat out doesn't make sense. Because I think right now in particular is a great opportunity for us to share our experiences and share our perspectives. And I think that's needed more than anything right now. So that's one thing that I just took upon myself to do. Let's say, okay, what I'm going to do is I don't have a license yet. It's like you said, the ancillary business, right? I don't have a license yet, and I can't grow or sell cannabis. I can't transport it, and I can't process it. But I can talk about it. I can talk about it, and I can talk about it from top to bottom to whoever is willing to listen.
There was a great orator that once lived, and they took his life too soon, but he called that drum major for justice. That is what beating that drum. Rest in peace to the great legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. All right, this has been a fantastic discussion, and I thank you, Dan and Mary. It's been a true pleasure hearing and sharing these different perspectives and the natures of the problem of systemic racism and the need for social equity and how the cannabis industry can lead this charge. We will now turn this over to our audience for questions from our panel. Elizabeth, I hope you can help me drive this train so that we can see these questions and we can chart a path for everyone to have a chance to take a bite at them as they come up. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. That was a really enlightening panel, and I loved hearing all of your perspectives. We do have one question about addressing the availability of capital and the sources of capital. And Dan, I don't know, since you're coming from the financial side of things, if you can address that.
What they're pointing out here was that according to PitchBook, which is a resource that tracks venture capital investment, says 25 deals were done to the tune of about $500,000 across 25 companies. And so I believe the point here is that, look, the money is out there. Why is it so hard for this money to make its way into, especially supporting minority enterprises? And, you know, this is a problem not just in cannabis, but across venture capital, where minority founders, especially Black founders, founders have a significantly more difficult time raising capital. Oh, I'm sorry, $500 million, not $500,000. Thank you for the
499.
correction from the chat there. Yeah, so $500 million were raised, and so very little of this is going to minority enterprise, as our commenter has said. Show me the money, and that's a fair question. Where is it going? So, you know, I know I don't really have the answers for you there. I can just tell you my experience as the founder of a startup, and you know, it's just one area where I need to acknowledge I've had an advantage because I'm a white founder, and the statistics say it was perhaps easier for me to raise the capital, for my partners and I to raise the capital to start our business as a result. So, other than to say, and I think I said this previously, perhaps the first step is to acknowledge the problem and then start talking about what we're going to do about it. I don't know how else to answer that question other than to say I think we need to acknowledge there is in fact a problem here. And if any of my co-panelists would add to that,
Now, and you've got this industry of, I liken it to, I think, a quote of one of my experts said, tribalist knowledge with Fortune 50 practices. So you've got a corporate America that consists of a predominant race of a predominant sex in C-suites across our country. Those individuals that chose to leave their corporate jobs and potentially partner with friends of theirs in this same corporate cadre, very few of them look like Mike and myself. If they're not those individuals, then they have identified individuals that do look like Mike and myself to partner with, and in hopes that they have enough capital to bring to the table and not have the problems that most face. So you've got a lot of individuals that have partnered across these states that have made themselves MSOs now, that have kind of stockpiled their capital, so to speak. Well, that really leaves a tremendous amount of other people out in the cold that would like to get into this business. So, I mean, Dan, it's not all on Abaca's shoulders, but you're an asset and a key pivot point within the banking industry specifically to begin to push the conversation as to why a BMO Harris or a Bank of America or any of the big funding houses are reluctant to get engaged, but continue to talk about it amongst themselves in corporate boardrooms, and many of their counterparts are maybe participating one-off, and encouraging that case in point to be made with the American Bankers Association and others to really start shining a light on what can you do. I mean, it's good business for banks. This isn't a bad thing. They're trying to get away from having cash and going to prison, so we need banks. And we need those banks to then turn around and invest at plausible rates that will allow for minority-owned businesses to thrive. So, I mean, I just think that there's great work to be done to get to showing the money. And there's plenty of it. Mary, Mike, you guys have any feedback on that?
I just want to say, I echo everything Dan said, and that's why when we came on here, I remember Dan instantly, because when I went to I met Dan last year at the Cannabis Expo, the first, I see a CEO just popped in, the Cannabis Expo last year. That was one of the first things, the first booths I sought out. And I remember saying to him, where's the money go? Where's the money go? How does this work? Like that, to me, that was so fascinating. And again, so I just wanted to say that yeah, obviously the money is a big part of it, but actually how, again, I'm an independent contractor. I know all about saving your own taxes and all this other type of things like that. And I know I've heard some of the pitfalls of other companies in different states, you know, as they've come online and people have gone to jail already for not paying their taxes on legal cannabis, you know, so I know these problems exist. So I just want to echo that. I think that what Dan is doing is such a vital part. Of course, what all of us doing, but I think that the financial part and how the monies move around is so important, and it's something that people that are looking to get in the industry have to be aware of, that even where you put your money is not as easy as just going to deposit it at Chase. Like that's not how it works.
Elizabeth, if I could chime in, I see a question came from the Hilton group. He says, can you please repeat the capital partners you named in San Francisco? I think I spoke of a group out of the East Coast, if you're thinking, and I don't know, but Mary, you may have mentioned someone, Capital Partners on the West Coast in San Francisco.
I did. I spoke about the Hood Incubator, which is more of an equity group working with equity applicants. I do closely work with Big Rock Partners, which is equity in San Francisco. I was going to say on that same thread, as you mentioned, ArcView Capital or ArcView Group.
Yes.
I am very excited. I have a call with Jeffrey from ArcView in just a couple days. And I'm very excited to be introducing Jeffrey with Bonita from the Indica and the Hood Incubator. If he is not already in touch with them, I will personally make sure that they get in touch. And I'm really excited to work with ArcView and help, you know, and make introductions if they need to be made.
Great. We look forward. I'm glad you're doing that. ArcView's taking a big charge, and we're glad to be associated with them. Joanne Molinaro, I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Legal Beagle. She says here, do you think the essential tag for cannabis companies as well as the increased SPAC activity in this space will help to normalize/legitimize cannabis? And if so, what impact will this have on the social inequalities that have historically plagued this space? Will it make it better, or will it simply widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots?
So that's maybe actually one that I feel qualified to jump in and answer here. So there's a lot to unpack there. A few things. The SPAC entities that she's talking about. These are these special purpose vehicles that are formed to acquire companies in cannabis, and they're a way that capital from the U.S. capital markets is being injected at a greater rate into the industry. And so, you know, as that happens, I think the onus then becomes really then falls on the people deploying capital and the companies that are receiving it to take action, because we know in the past where capital has flowed, it has flowed in these historic patterns that we are now seeing a conscious effort to disrupt. And so the potential is there, but people still need to do the work. But then you mentioned the essential designation that a lot of cannabis businesses across the country have been given during this COVID-19 period. And in short, yes, I think you're absolutely correct that this essential designation very much does advance the conversation in a lot of ways, both conscious and unconscious. You know, it's going to become harder and harder for people to question the legitimacy of the legal cannabis industry or the use of cannabis or the normalcy of the use of cannabis. As we saw nationwide, these businesses were among the few in communities, some of the very few that have some of the very few businesses that have stayed open. In some areas, you even saw Denver is a great example of this, a significant public outcry if the cannabis businesses were to be closed. And so this absolutely advances the conversation. But as the conversation continues, we still all have our role to do in being mindful of equity considerations as we move forward.
Great. We've got another question here. What is the biggest barrier in getting previously incarcerated people into the industry? Because with a felony record, you can't work at a plant touching place, and we are essentially looking out at industry experts who participated in the legal market. So I guess in short, it kind of confuses me, but what barriers? I think, Mary, you spoke to this. How can the law be relaxed on hiring convicted felons or those with misdemeanors to work in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out, whoever asked that question, because these are industry experts that are being locked out. These are people that have been doing this work for a very long time. They're pioneers, basically. And so one of the things that Last Prisoner Project is working on, as we're working with governor's offices to create a new category of clemency specifically for nonviolent cannabis offenders, as we work to, and by the way, we're working at a state level for the time being because we feel like that's where we can make the biggest impact and get the most people out at the same time. Of course, we are definitely coming at this from a federal level as well. And even more so now with this incredible Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement that's happening, people are now paying attention. And I think that better policy will be being created at a rapid pace. And that's really exciting. But for now, as we're working with governor's offices on a state level, at least, as people are being released, it's really important for us as an organization. We call it a clean slate, helping people come out of prison and getting a clean slate, basically having those, getting the records expunged. So it does open them up to being able to work in the industry, starting with, we call it being fully free. Free from those old records that are not even an issue anymore, which would lower those barriers to employment within the industry. Because again, these are pioneers, these are experts, and they definitely deserve a seat at the table.
Mary, if I may for a second, I want to go back to something you mentioned previously, which is that, well, these legal barriers exist in most states, although it's different from state to state, that would preclude people with certain criminal histories from working in a plant touching business. As you mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities in ancillary businesses up and down the supply chain, and we've received a comment in the chat to this effect as well. You know, what I would like to say is, again, to point out that these opportunities do exist outside of plant touching businesses. And as the CEO of an ancillary cannabis business, though we are small, we are going to be doing some hiring throughout the course of the year. I just want you and any of your colleagues that may be watching to know that if you ever come across a resume or a candidate that you think has any interest in fintech, banking, payments, any of the things we do, we would love to talk to them.
Amazing. It's really great to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to just hop onto that really quick as well. I also saw that comment about ancillary businesses. And yes, I think that always needs to be mentioned in every conversation about cannabis as well. I told my friends this over 2 years ago. I said, you know, Goodyear doesn't sell cars, and they don't sell cars, and they don't make cars, right? But they are in the car industry, and everyone knows their name, right? That is an ancillary business of the car industry. The same thing is about to happen with cannabis. It is a true industry, and there's so many things that you can do that have nothing to do with getting licenses, right? And this is just using your talents and the things that you are passionate about to find a way in. And that's really how I got my way in with my ancillary business, the Weed Travel Food blog, and my WTF Media, my WTF Consulting. I created all of that stuff before I ever thought about going for a license, because I wanted a way in, and I knew it wasn't going to just be given to me. So I found a way to shoehorn my way into the industry. And the people need to know that that's a huge opportunity for a lot of people that are interested.
Thank you, Mike, for offering that feedback. We've got an anonymous attendee. I don't know if we've got an answer to his question. That's
yes.
not.
I was unclear about the question, but you can email us. I just chatted you and our email address, so you can send us that. We do have another question about, does anyone know of any top tier MBA programs that are offering specialties in the cannabis industry, or any degrees that you can get continuing ed-wise in the cannabis industry for further education?
I do know of a few institutions, not top tier, but they're
top tier.
Chicago State University is pioneering a program there on their campus, and they've been long advocates for social equity and social justice. I'm very proud of the work that President Scott is doing there. There is a school in the state of Ohio, the Cleveland School of Cannabis, that will soon be growing. It's an accredited university that is slowly branching out and growing its roots to start training courses. the University of Pine Bluff has a horticulture, the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff currently has a horticulture program, big in agriculture, always has been since Arkansas AM&N. But I imagine with what has just happened there, Dan could probably speak to this, that you'll start to see a shift in the tide and plant soil science and maybe in agriculture overall, moving towards opportunities, as this industry has been and will be a very good placeholder for the state of Arkansas. Do you guys have other institutions out there that you know of?
I do. I've been working with Trey at Academy for Cannabis Science. And basically they offer their classes at 5 accredited universities around the nation. So it depends on where you're at. I don't know. I don't think that those are MBA, I will say, but yeah, check out Academy of Cannabis Science.
Yeah, I just saw someone mention Olive Harvey, another Chicago City College that is doing something as well. Again, I'm not as familiar, but I was aware that Chicago State University is doing something, and I know that there's others that are starting as well. So I think they're all in their infancy stage.
And I think they're offering a degree program at the University of Massachusetts. So I had to do a little more homework there, but I know in our initial research over 2 years when we were reaching out to healthcare professionals, we surveyed in focus groups over 200 physicians, nurses, CEOs, and it was resoundingly in our poll that most of them said they lacked any education in their initial coursework, let alone in their post graduation and or as they went into residency. So there is a big gap there as it relates to our healthcare schools, or those that are focused on turning out our next doctors, really educating them on the powerful benefits of this therapeutic plant for our citizens. Elizabeth, you want to try and pitch us another one with some time we have left?
Yes, I was just reading them. I don't know if we have any questions yet. We've just had some other, some more input as far as the universities go. Olive Henry College in Chicago.
Yeah.
Jay mentioned that. And then Joanne said that their law firm offers continuing education on cannabis on a variety of different topics. Joanne, if you wanted to pop your URL into the chat, so everyone can have that in case they want to go check out the continuing ed that you offer. I think
Joanne's
that would be good.
a solid lead. She's got a great firm here. And she's just a really solid person who can also cook some great dishes. So we appreciate you.
And one other thing too, since we're talking about continuing education, I also want to mention Chicago Normal. People can't forget about their local organizations as well. If you're, of course, it depends on how educated you need to be on the topic. But if you're educated, you're looking for education just so that you can get involved, right? If you're going, whether it's going after a license or you're just interested in advocacy, there's a lot of organizations in almost every area of the country where you can get training for cannabis and cannabis related, the cannabis industry just in general. I joined Chicago Normal in 2018, and I've taken several classes with them, and all dealing with cannabis. But they have everything from advocacy classes to actually bud tender classes and how to properly serve the people that you will be coming in contact if you actually work in the industry. So I just wanted to shout out Normal and Chicago Normal.
Grassroots Chicago Normal, and a guy like me coming from Arkansas, they opened their doors to me, and Edie was just tremendous. And if you're needing to learn how to go through the certification process, begin your application, if you're not sure what sector you're trying to enter in the industry, they are truly, as we could say, layman speak. They're not way over your head. You can get it right where it counts with Chicago Normal, and the work that they did and pushing towards the legislation here was tremendous. So, I mean, I can't beat that drum enough. Thank you for highlighting them, Mike.
Sure, and the network, right? Like that's the other thing I think that is great. And people ask me about the cannabis community and what I like so much about it besides the cannabis, right? And I always say it's the community. It's the community. Like the people in general are very helpful, and I've made so many connections just from getting involved with the community. My cannabis attorney, who is like my right hand right now, I met him at a Chicago Normal event. I didn't hire him to actually be my attorney until over a year later. But that relationship was built through normal. So networking is everything.
Well, we're running up on our time. We're actually a little over. If the panelists want, we do have one more question. I don't know if we want to answer that and then say our goodbyes. But
here's what I'll do, Elizabeth. We could respond to that question if we could type that for them. I just wanted to make certain to close and highlight that, you know, our session draws a lot of unique pieces that, you know, whether we're thinking about it or not, this is right now in these times. And I would like for you all to reflect for a moment on this truly special opportunity we're all facing. It's not a time to be frustrated. There's enough to frustrate us. There's enough things going on. This is a new industry. And we're not burdened, as I mentioned earlier, by a lot of the institutional baggage. Yes, there is some, but we're not burdened by a lot of the old institutional baggage that oftentimes stymies the growth of new industries. So the cannabis industry is booming. It's got a lot of potential to create enormous wealth for individuals, for families and communities across our country, to change the lives truly of many to come. It's a crucial movement in our governments and our companies to really start shining a light on what social injustice looks like, what inequalities look like, and especially how we can change and move the needle in the cannabis industry space. Clearly, we have a long way to go as a society and as an industry, but I believe that this isn't a powerful example for us to set and have others follow. So I want to thank you, Elizabeth, again. Thanks to our panelists, Mary Bailey, Mike Malcom, Dan Roda, and special thanks to Abaca. I mean, this could not have happened without you all and your vision to have this timely and much needed discussion. And hopefully we can come back. I mean, it's not a one-hit wonder. I think we need to continue these types of conversation and face the challenges before us. So thank you, Elizabeth. I'll turn it over to you, and thank you all for allowing me to moderate.
yeah, thank y'all so much. On behalf of Abaca, I just want to give a shout out to all the panelists and everyone that took the time out of their day to tune in. We recorded the webinar and we're going to be posting it online. So feel free to share with anybody that couldn't join us. And then also be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, the CanFi Report. We'll be sending out invitations to other webinars and other information that we're putting out there regarding access to capital in the cannabis industry and a lot of other news. So y'all stay connected, stay well, and have a great day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Dan.